Hello, beautiful souls, and welcome to the Woo Curious podcast. Your map to the mystical, your key to the sacred, and your guide back home to yourself. I'm Eileen, a writer, a spiritual coach, energy healer, and slow living witch. This podcast is your invitation to explore a world where the mundane and the sacred intertwine. It's a haven for those ready to take the first steps into the realms of magic and mystery, providing a safe space for you to embark on your own enchanted journey towards healing and self-discovery. Here, I'll unveil the whispers of the mystical, the rituals often hidden in plain sight, and I'll engage in sacred conversation intended to stir your soul and lead you back into your power. I'm all about demystifying woo and witchcraft. So, whether you're a seasoned seeker or simply woo curious, I'm so delighted you've decided to join me on this journey. Let's make magic. Hey Woo Crew! Before we drop into today's episode, I just wanted to check in with you and see how you're doing. I'm wondering if you are taking enough time for you these days, or if perhaps you feel a little overwhelmed and maybe borderline exhausted with all of the to-dos in your day-to-day life. If this is the case, I have created a resource just for you in order to help you get the rest your body is craving. And because we're all about the woo and witchcraft here, it is a fun one. I have a quiz called Which Witch Are You? And so not only will you find out which type of witch you are, or which witch you would be if you were a witch, if you don't identify that way, but you also find out what type of rest your body craves based on which witch you are. The link will be below in the show notes, and I would love if you would share with me which witch you are once you find out. Hello, and welcome back, Woo Crew, to another episode of the Woo Curious podcast. I am your host, Eileen, and I'm here today with Julia Jet Livingston. Julia spent years living on the street, hopping trains, panhandling, and eventually rising above trauma to build a 6-figure massage practice in a new town while working just 3 days a week over the span of a year and a half. Now she helps spiritually minded entrepreneurs grow their business in alignment with their values and spirituality, empowering them to reach their next level. Her approach aligns business growth with integrity, values, and spiritual principles. And I am so excited to welcome her on the show today. Julia, thank you so much for being here with me.
Thank you so much for having me, Eileen. I'm super excited to be here.
Yay, yeah, I'm looking forward to our conversation. And as I mentioned before we jumped on to record, I really am always so curious about people's spiritual journeys. As the title of this podcast suggests, many of the women listening are woo curious, and maybe they're deep into the spirituality and the woo, or maybe they're just starting to dabble with it. And so I would love if you would share a little bit about your own journey into spirituality and how it led you to the work that you do today in the world.
I love this question, and I feel like it's so like the spiritual journey it's like a life journey. And I mean, I grew up in like a Catholic like my mom's Catholic, and I went to Catholic school, and so there was always like religion in my life, and I always liked the singing, and regardless of how church made me feel, because it never made me feel completely whole. It wasn't really what I was looking for, is what I realized with time. I still found the Catholic rituals to be really interesting, and I can understand why people still gather to do that. I mean, regardless of what the spirituality is or the religion, so much of it is just gathering to give gratitude to that life creating energy. And so even though I figured out that really wasn't my path, that's really where my path started. And from there, well, I ended up really liking hanging out on the street, and I loved just being outside. And now the spiritual journey for me is so connected, like, and intertwined with nature, and that groundedness that we get just from being in the outdoors and being connected to that universal energy, that life force that goes through all things, not just the living ones, but truly all things in this universe.
That's a beautiful way to describe it. I love that you touched on the ritual of the Catholic Church being something that you can still see so much value in. The topic is near and dear to my heart because I feel as though ritual is lacking in our modern world in a lot of ways as religious institutions have fallen more out of favor. And it's such a beautiful way to create meaning and connection between humans and mark the significance of the passage of time and moments in our lives and give us the kind of that sense of depth and richness to life that so many of us on the spiritual paths are seeking.
Yeah, and I have to agree with you. One of the first things I saw on your shelves was The Mists of Avalon, and I love the story of that book and the intertwining of what was happening in that time and the intertwining of religions. And it can, for me, it can be so exciting to move through the calendar year. And I mean, I could choose to be upset that Christianity took over and now everything is this certain way. But it's also pretty magical that we can still see the connections between ancient old world religions and how they're actually still preserved through these Christian traditions. And I mean, I'm in no way in support of the like burning witches or anything like that. Anything in the past that people long ago did that I'm so grateful that doesn't happen anymore. But it is so interesting for me to move through the calendar year and still see that representation. That's these ties that go back to this ancient world.
Yeah, I love a few things that you brought up there. That book is amazing. And above it there, that's If Women Rose Rooted by Sharon Blackie. And that's another of my favorites, which is again that connection back into land and the re-enchantment of life and the interconnectedness of the world. And I have a resonance with what you said about, I'm not a Christian and I used to have a bit of a hate on for Christianity in general. And I certainly disagree with a lot of aspects of the organized religion and the very patriarchal religion of Christianity. And you're right that there are so many pieces of ancient tradition and wisdom that got woven in and brought forward that we still have those threads to tie us back. They, wove in many of the existing practices of the pagan religions that they encountered. And they offered some of their own too that are beautiful. I think there's a lot of wisdom to be found in different religious traditions, as long as we are careful to kind of bring in that overarching harmlessness and compassion piece that I try to weave through all of my work as I tread this path. I am curious as well. So in your bio, it says that you went from being on the street to having a six-figure business in a year. And I'm so curious how that played out. How did you, maybe if it's something you're comfortable talking about, how did you end up there where you were living outside with the pros and the cons? And how did you make that decision and that leap to shift back into this world of actually having a career and moving towards this really incredible transformation that you had within the span of a year?
Yeah, so I didn't move from the streets to a six-figure practice in a year, but I did build that practice in a year and a half.
Right.
There were years of time between building that six-figure practice in a year and a half and the moment I stopped living on the street.
Right.
And I had help from friends, I had help from family. I'm active in recovery. And I ended up on the street because I didn't feel like I fit in with my peer groups, Catholic school. And and I met some people on the street who invited me to be around them. And at that point in my life, I felt I was really lonely. I was really lonely. And I found the support that that I wanted. And, I feel like if I hadn't found them, I might have killed myself because I was really in a depressed place. School had forced me into therapy and all of that.
Mm-hmm.
And so I feel like every part of my life, it's as though something saved me from the last part and it creates this flow. So, I mean, these were the first people who showed up and saved me from where I was. And of course, after that, I needed to save myself from being in that lifestyle. Once I started normalizing everything I mean, I came from one thing, but I didn't feel like I fit in there.
Mm-hmm.
So once somebody accepted me into a different type of culture, I started accepting everything in that as normal. So like passing out at 10 a.m. from drinking, normal, living in the park, normal, panhandling, normal, hopping trains, expected, you know?
Mm-hmm.
And so moving from that for a long time, I actually couldn't see any other lifestyle. I didn't think anything else was possible. And I think that's why for a lot of us, it can be really important to practice self-forgiveness.
Mm-hmm.
Because if I had known how to do better than what I was doing, I certainly would have.
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, that kind of compassion, once we find it for ourselves, becomes much easier to extend to other people.
Right.
And so I remember when I first wanted to stop living that lifestyle, I didn't know how. And it took another 7 years. And eventually, I met a guy who took me in, taught me how to surf. And I realized that I didn't want to work at the warehouse job that I was working at. I wanted to surf all the time. And so I went to massage school and graduated that and ended up with my own massage practice by accident.
Mm-hmm.
And it was terrifying because I had no idea how to run a business at all. I got into massage because I figured that people would come in, they'd tell me what's wrong, they'd be quiet, they'd lay down, they'd do my job, they'd leave. And when I became an entrepreneur, that wasn't the case. When I got my first practice, I had just met a chiropractor on the beach, and I said, "Hey, I'm a massage therapist. If you're looking for one, let me know." And he said, "Sure, come by, talk to me." I thought he was going to hire me, and instead he's shaking my hand, congratulating me on my new business, and I'm terrified. I had no idea what to do.
Right.
So I had to learn how to get clients and keep clients coming back and keep people interested in what I'm doing, create a really wholesome experience, a holistic experience that people could really feel high quality vibe being around me, being in my office. And I probably wouldn't have gone through with that, but it was so exciting because I knew that I'd manifested that space and manifested that moment, because a year before then I was still in massage school, and I still have the notebook. My teacher had asked us to write down where we want to be in a year.
Mm-hmm.
And I said, shared studio close to the beach. This was 4 blocks from Ocean Beach in San Francisco. And, I wanted to be able to hear the seagulls. And then it showed up, and I had to say yes. And that was really the beginning of, to me, a whole nother essence of a spiritual journey, because the growth that we create and experience when we're growing businesses is a spiritual journey in itself.
Oh, so much so. There's so many different threads here that I want to ask. This happens every time I interview someone. I'm like, there's 18 questions in my brain, and I want to know the answers to all of them. And I want to touch on just a really beautiful thread that I can see between that place of, you were feeling lonely and that real deep need for connection and acceptance and understanding, to be understood and to feel like you belong. It's such a powerful driver for humans, and it's so needed. There's a loneliness epidemic, we know, in the world right now, and especially post-COVID. But there's that same kind of sense when you talk about creating a holistic experience for your clients, again, of that being seen and being recognized and offering that connection in a really healthy space where you can support people. I know that massage is so much more for so many practitioners, especially spiritual ones. There's so much more than just, touching a body and helping the muscles release. It becomes, you can be a coach, and you can be a trusted friend or a support. It ends up morphing for a lot of body workers because there is that added layer of safety that you can create if you do it well, which I just know you do, or you did because of who you are and how you grew. The other thing that I wanted to touch on, which I think will lead us really beautifully into kind of your area of expertise these days, which is that, that transformation piece and the way that you help your clients, your entrepreneurial clients, is that power of writing down our dreams. Because of how you said, when the opportunity came along for the thing you wrote down, you couldn't say no. It was almost like there was, there's a holding ourselves accountable. If we've written down, I want this, and then that comes along, there's this sense of like, oh, okay, well, I guess I kind of have to say yes because I asked for it. Whereas if you don't write it down, you might forget. It's totally normal to forget our dreams. So I love that kind of I don't know, through line or like self accountability piece or manifestation, however we want to talk about it. But is that a practice that you feel like has kind of carried you through as you continue to grow and then that you use with your clients?
Yeah, I think writing down goals is incredibly important. Um, for the reasons that you listed, I mean, just even having a goal is the difference between deciding to jump in the car and go to the beach or deciding to just jump in the car and drive until you run out of gas. So when we have the end in mind, it's so much easier for us to build the way. Now, I mean, in that certain aspect, that was pure manifestation. I mean, I like, other than going through with, getting my certification and, working for people doing massage, that's something that just came through. But at the same time, in that universal energy, when we're really connected to something and our mind is, when we're experiencing something in our unconscious mind and it's always there,
Mhm.
we're attracting that into our present moment.
Mhm.
Like, the universe is bending in ways that I certainly can't understand. But that's not the first time that there's been magic present, like, in my present.
Right.
Like, part of this life journey is just experiencing the magic that we get to create,
Mhm.
sometimes unintentionally and sometimes, like, hopefully intentionally. I mean, the more and more we get to know ourselves and understand laws of attraction and understand manifestation, the more that we can move forward in this life in a really intentional way. Because it's not only the things that we want that we're manifesting, it can also be the things that we don't want that
Right.
we're manifesting. And one of the most important things that I ever learned about anxiety, which I've certainly suffered from a lot more before I learned this,
Mhm.
is that anxiety is a fear of the future,
Mhm.
and the future hasn't happened yet. So we get to choose the most awesome future that we can place in our minds. And we can imagine how much more excited we'll be to show up for that future. I mean, if it's the difference between, oh, well, if I do this, I'm not going to get any clients and no one's going to show up, between, I'm going to be fully booked a month out and have a wait list, 20 people long, and
Mhm.
people are going to be calling and there's going to be 5-star reviews and it's going to be so much fun and I can't wait to do this. I'm going to heal people. I'm going to change lives. My community is going to be better. Everything's going to be awesome. So choosing that mindset from, like, something that scares us
Mhm.
to moving past that fear and really focusing on what we want. And that is, oh, it's just so beautiful to be able to do that. And I know that during that time, from when I wrote down that goal to when it actually happened, my mind still went to that place. I was visually constructing that place all the time. I
Mhm.
was creating it. And then one day I was standing in it,
Yeah.
like I should be surprised or
Right.
something.
Right. Well, and there's a lot of wisdom too around practices of visualizing it or writing it out, scripting, things like that as you work towards a goal. Because anxiety is a reality and it is a fear of the future, if we can acclimatize our nervous systems ahead of reaching or achieving a goal to the realities of that goal as best as we can envision them, we're much more likely to take the steps needed to actually create the reality that we're hoping for rather than be afraid and get frozen in paralysis or fear or turning away from that. Anxiety is such a common experience for so many people. I imagine it's something that you work with your clients around in I don't know, do you offer one-on-one, or is it like a group, or how? Yeah, this is supposed to be at the end, but I want to know now.
Well, I do work one-to-one, and what you were talking about, moving past that anxiety and what we want in our future usually requires us to be somebody else.
Mhm,
I mean, not somebody else, but we need to grow to get there.
mhm,
Otherwise, we'd already be experiencing it. There's things we need to learn, there's things that we need to do differently. We probably just don't know what they are yet.
mhm,
But if we step back and look at what that goal is and who we need to be to fulfill that goal, who is that person who already has it?
mhm.
I mean, how are they answering their phone? What does their website look like? What are they offering? How do they treat their clients? Do they ask their clients to come back, or do they just wave at them when they walk out the door?
Right.
So, looking at all these different ways that we step into a new identity and step into a bigger identity of ourselves.
Yeah.
That's one of the best ways that we can move past that anxiety, because we're not only visualizing what we want, but we're becoming who we want to be.
Yeah. Yeah, and I feel like entrepreneurs are a unique bunch of people. I was speaking to somebody earlier today about how, because of what you're saying, of that need to grow and change, not become a different person, but change and grow and do that inner work and self-exploration and really come up against and then move past a lot of those blocks that are so easy to get stuck on. It's such an exciting thing to be able to support people who are in that entrepreneurial space to move through those blocks and grow. And I think that it's probably something that's familiar to you working with spiritual entrepreneurs, especially. There often is that kind of, the broke healer trope,
Oh, yeah.
that tricky spot where we get into a space of really, we're here to do our heart's work, our soul's work. We're here to help and support people. We genuinely just want to help. And then
Mhm.
we fall into this place of constantly giving more than we have capacity for, and often at prices that don't sustain or support us. And we run into these walls of burnout as well. Do you have anything to offer or suggestions for anybody who's listening who might be like, oh, that's me, whether or not they're an entrepreneur or women in general?
I am a recovering under earner.
Yeah.
And I entirely understand that feeling and that statement of just wanting to give and wanting to heal, and how can I possibly charge for healing?
Mhm.
And the thing is we're not able to help anybody if we go out of business, if we have to shut our doors, if we can't enforce policies that keep our doors open, if we can't charge what we need to actually thrive.
Mhm.
If we're not charging what we need to actually thrive, then it's very possible that what can happen is we're overgiving, and it's possible that that can cause some resentment, but what it can definitely cause is financial struggle.
Mhm.
And the thing about financial struggle is, when you're worried about paying your rent, when you're worried about paying your groceries, when you're worried about keeping the doors open to your space, that's stuck in self. We're
Mhm.
stuck in self fear. We're stuck in fear. And and that's a kind of self obsession, which honestly isn't spiritual at all. When we're stuck in self, we're not able to be of service to our clients at a high level because we're too worried about whether or not we're going to get what we need to survive.
Mhm.
So, what I've found is that when we're actually charging at, at a price that will help us thrive in our businesses, maybe we'll be able to work a little bit less so that we can show up for the clients who come in more, then they're going to be seeing better results. And it's likely that we're going to be attracting people who are even more committed to getting results and to feeling better and to their healing.
Mhm. I love that wisdom. It is that sense because there's so much overlap. I don't specifically work with entrepreneurs, though I do have entrepreneurial clients, but I work with women who are care providers of some description, whether it's for, their nurses or it's for their children, their families. And that pouring from an empty cup adage comes up over and over. I really love Rebecca Campbell's metaphor of the well, the overflowing well. If we are worried where our next sip of water is coming from, it's really hard to share that sip when it arrives. From that place of lack and scarcity, of overwhelm, it's hard to be creative. It's hard to have capacity to hold big anything for our clients, for our loved ones. It's hard to feel expansive and do those big scary things that entrepreneurship requires of us as well when we're in that place of kind of grasping or clinging or lack or fear. It's very much like, yeah, in the self, but in the like brain part of the self too. It takes us right out of our bodies and our ability to tap into our intuition as well as we move and make decisions in the world.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree so much with that. Stepping, like, it does pull us away from that intuition. I mean, when we're in fear, like, that's just plain survival, and we don't thrive when we're in a place of survival. And that's what our brains are made for. Our brains are made to make us survive.
Yep.
We are here with these brains because we are survivors. But our ancestors, they had different worries. They had to worry about bears. They had to worry about putting food on the table. They had to worry about people disappearing from camp. So, I mean, just a slight change or maybe a rejection can trigger that same part of the brain that creates this fear, this fight or flight response. And I think so many of us have what seems like, oh goodness, like, I know this was for me, and I'll just be completely honest here. Aside of being scared to charge for healing, I was also really scared of rejection. What if I charged what I need to charge and then people say no? What if I charge what I need to charge and people judge me? So there's this fear that, I will be pushed away from the tribe and people won't like me and I'll be alone and forgotten. um, but what I found is that really wasn't the case, because I was standing up for creating a business that would really support me and support my clients. Because once I created something that was really thriving, where I only had to work 3 days a week, I could really show up for my clients at a high level. And that meant that they got a higher quality of care. They had the most beautiful office in town to come to. And I could show up for them. I could show up for them and really create a high level of healing.
Yeah, I'm so glad you touched on that. Actually, I wrote rejection down before you were like, I'm going to touch on this, because that has been my own probably biggest hurdle as I've started to grow this business and working towards expanding more, is that fear of what will people think, what will people say, especially if we're trying to expand to be able to help more people. It requires different pricing or different structure. And I know that's a really real concern for a lot of people in entrepreneurship, and women especially in those spiritual and caregiving kind of spaces, of that not wanting to not only be rejected, which is that that tribal drive to survive. We need community, we need connection. That harkens back to your kind of beginning story as well, but also that desire to not exclude people. And so that's another thing that I think is a beautiful piece about having more than enough and being in a place where you are bringing in enough money to feel stable and safe and able to give, is that we can always offer to those who can't, who those in need. When we have the capacity, because we have more than enough, we're able to give back generously and do things for those who might not be able to afford our traditional services, but can benefit from some of the wisdom and things that we have to share.
Exactly. Yeah. And we can have that built into our policies. We can have that built into our marketing. We can have that built into our message. Just because we have a high quality item or a service, that doesn't mean that people have to be excluded. Like, if you have your own business, that is your own business and you get to run it however you want. And that's one of the coolest things about being in business.
Yeah.
And that means that you can charge what you want, and you can also show up for people in generosity. And it goes back to how you're saying we just can't pour from an empty cup. We need to be healthy and strong so that we can show up at this 100% level for the people who need our help.
Yeah. Yeah. I think there's so many layers to this that just came to mind, is that, that sense of glorification that happens in our culture of pushing ourselves to the limit, of that one-upping each other over how many hours we've worked or how little sleep we've had or how much we went without to give for others. And it's such a toxic trait of capitalism and the patriarchy to have those things held up as like, oh, look at how worthy this person is. They've given up everything they have for others, and it's so unsustainable. And it's like an eye for an eye almost, that sense of, let's come right back to Christianity. But that sense of like, it doesn't do anyone any good for you to get to a place of depletion where then you need to be supported or can't support yourself, and are in scarcity. It's this tidal shift that I feel like is just beginning to happen, where we're starting to recognize that we are not less worthy when we take care of ourselves first.
Yeah. I mean, worthiness, enoughness, these words. Like, I love how unspecific they are.
Yeah.
It's just so unspecific, like not worthy of what? Not enough of what, And when if I'm ever experiencing those thoughts, I mean, are they serving me? No, not really. I mean, if I want to get really specific about it, I mean, like, well, what am I not worthy of? Is that true? No, like, I'm totally worthy of that. And so is anybody else. Like, I believe that everyone is worthy of their biggest dreams. And worthiness, enoughness, not enough of what? Not enough of what? When I think about not enough of what, then I can actually get really specific. Like, what am I not enough of? And maybe there is something. Maybe there is something I could be like, well, you know what? I could turn the volume up on that. I could shine brighter right there. I can be more than enough of that,
Right.
for sure. Like what is the person that I want to create? Like, I get this one chance to be here on this planet. Like, what if this is my last incarnation and this is my one chance to do this? Like, how am I going to shine bright? How am I going to go big?
Yeah.
How am I going to make this dream happen? And what do I have to be enough of to do it? I can do it. Just first thing I need to do is figure out what's going to make me happy. Because I mean, whether somebody has nothing or has a ton of stuff, the question is, are they happy?
Yeah. Yeah. I love the kind of curiosity, the probing of like, okay, what am I not worthy of? What don't I feel enough of? And taking that almost as an exercise when we're in those spaces of feeling not enough or unworthy, getting kind of onto the page again, the power of the written word, and being able to sit with ourselves and journal and get into like, what don't I feel worthy of? And it is like, oh no, like at the foundation, my conscious belief is that I am worthy, I am enough. And often it's those subconscious stories or patterns that are running. And then the other thing that you said right at the end there, that like defining those words for ourselves and things like happiness and having enough. I know for me, I find in the world of like coaching and this life path that I've chosen, there's so much noise about manifesting oodles of money and become like you basically. It makes me feel bad for not wanting to be a millionaire, but I don't have that drive. I really like, I think that there are benefits. If I was a millionaire, I'd be giving a lot of money to the environment and social causes and things like that, so I can see that for me would be a compelling drive. But so much of it is like, I think about Amanda Frances. If there's any Amanda Frances lovers on right now, I'm gonna maybe ruffle some feathers. But I really like, I don't hate her, but I really don't love what she stands for and how she moves. Like she's a private jet. Sorry, that's a big no in my world. Not with the environmental crisis. I think I have her book above me too, and like there's lots of wisdom there in terms of really feeling like she's worth worth it, which I think can be borrowed. And then also I think there's a lot of pressure that makes us feel like if that isn't our dream, that if our dream is a small and delicious life, as one of the people I look up to would say, Carmen Spagnola, that for some reason that's not enough. I don't know if I have a question here. I'm more just kind of pondering on some of the things.
Amanda Francis. Well, I understand. I understand the feeling there. I didn't know she had a private jet.
Yeah.
And I mean, I'm not a private jet person either. Like, but that's the thing, is everybody gets to pick what their vision of success is. When we're entrepreneurs, we get to choose what is success on our terms, because it doesn't mean that we have to be a millionaire. There's people out there who are happy to have a barbecue with their family. That's what makes them feel rich inside. And there's people out there who just want a little piece of land where they can feel safe and secure. And there's people out there who need a private jet and investment properties and a big spread in LA. But each of us get to decide what is that's really going to light my fire. What is my goal? And really getting curious to find out if that is actually my goal, or is that society's goal? Is that my mom's goal? Is that my sister's goal? Is that my best friend's goal? Is this something that I actually want? Because it's so important to know what we actually want, because if we're not actually connected to the goals that we want, then we can work our butts off to get something that we never really wanted to begin with. And that is not a step to happiness. If we're able to experience this gratitude every day for something that we see in our future, that's probably something that's meant for us. I would have a hard time visualizing my private jet and feeling oodles of gratitude for my private jet, but to somebody else, that private jet represents something to them. That represents that they've made it, that they've worked hard, they've come all this way, they've done the mindset work, they've done the marketing, they've done all of this stuff. And now they have the private jet and they can go places. And everyone's different, everyone's different. And that's, oh goodness, that's one of the things I love about being in business, is it's so authentic to each one of us. Like, it's so magical to live in a time and place where we get to express ourselves through our businesses and through the work that we do and the way that we do today. I mean, the way women are showing up for business these days, we weren't even allowed to do this for how long, this is an entirely new paradigm that we get to live in. And I think that we're just so incredibly lucky to get to experience this day and age.
Yeah, I agree. I definitely think there's a big piece of this journey for so many of us entrepreneurs is that tapping into like, oh, what do I actually desire? What will actually make me happy? Because we've been told what to want for so long that sometimes it's hard to tease it apart. I'm reading a book right now as well, and I'm conscious of time. I'm going to have to wrap us up soon, but I'm reading a book called When God Was a Woman. And as you said, it's this whole new paradigm of women in business. Well, if we look back to several thousand years BCE, it was the women in the temples who owned all the land, who ran all the businesses, who handled the money. Like, it's this really fascinating shift that happened from that place of matrilineal descent. And it's partly because they didn't know how to they didn't know how babies were made necessarily. And you could never prove paternity, but you knew who the mother was. And so matrilineal descent made sense. The goddess was supreme because she birthed the world. And so the goddess temples and their priestesses were the centers of the towns and the villages and the wealth and the land ownership where there was land ownership. So it almost feels like we're returning to some wisdom that existed once upon a time.
I like that.
Yeah.
It's about time.
Right? We've got some coding in our DNA to help us navigate this.
Totally.
Yeah. For listeners who are on this entrepreneurship journey and seeking support, can you tell us a little bit about your offering and how people work with you?
Oh, yeah. Well, I work one-to-one with clients who want to grow their holistic practices to 6 figures. And I have a 90-day program and a 6-month program. And in those programs, we really build a foundation and we build the visibility that you'll need to pull in a consistent schedule and keep people coming back. And we look at your pricing. And I know sometimes it's not very fun to look at our pricing, but when we price with confidence without feeling selfish, when we move past those blocks, we're really not only empowering ourselves, but we get to empower our communities through our business. And so I think that is an incredibly important piece for us to touch on, as well as policies. Girl, like holistic healers, we need to embrace and honor our policies,
Wow.
because I worry for us sometimes. I don't know how many calls I get on where I'll talk to somebody and they'll say, I wasn't able to enforce this policy, or this person has canceled so many times. And when I was in a place where I wasn't enforcing policies, it caused me so much unnecessary stress because I wasn't sure if I could keep my doors open. But when we have a clear vision of what our policies are and how to honor them, that makes life so much easier.
Oh, yeah, so necessary. That's a topic that comes up for many an entrepreneur often is like,
Totally.
how do I navigate this? And yeah, a lot of it is that, again, mindset and that belief work that our time is just as valuable as theirs. And
Mhm.
it's a struggle for so many of us who can just understand why they didn't show up, you know, and have so much
Yeah.
compassion. And I think there's an invitation to have compassion and also firm boundaries. Another of my favorite
Yeah.
topic, boundaries. Is there anything else that you want to share or bring into the space before we wrap up today?
Oh, yeah. I do have a free guide. It's a free spiritually aligned pricing guide.
Mm,
And so this is an awesome guide that you can use to move your mindset forward and confidently price without feeling selfish. And so you can find that at juliajet.com/pricing. And if there's one thing that I really want people to remember, it is that you are entirely worthy of your dreams, no matter how dark your bottom was, no matter what you're coming back from. You are worthy of your dreams, and you are entirely capable of success when you step into that identity and that belief of who you're becoming and truly what you want, not what society wants, but what you want.
mm. Thank you so much for sharing that, and of course, the links, that sounds like an amazing guide, I'm gonna go get it. The links for everything, how to connect with Julia, how to get this guide will be below in the show notes. Head on over to Instagram, connect with her there as well, and as always, if you liked this episode, please leave a rating and a review, it helps ever so much. Julia, thank you for joining me this week.
Thank you so much, Eileen.
My pleasure. Ugh. Okay, Woo Crew. Have a great rest of your week. I'll be back again next week with another episode for you. Bye for now.